Hey everybody, today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the TireMinder A1AS TPMS system for RVs and trailers. So the A1AS is a pretty advanced system. We're going to have tons of different alerts. They're going to notify us while we're driving of any potential issues or any issues happening as we speak. Now, just some of these alerts here. We're going to have an alert for a rapid leak, which is going to be a loss of pressure of 3 psi or more in less than 2 minutes. So that's going to display a rapid leak alert. The other alert we have is going to be a slow leak, which is a pressure loss of 6 psi in 2 to 10 minutes. We also have a low pressure alert, which is going to mean that the pressure in our tire is going to be 15% less of the baseline capacity. We also have a high pressure alert, which is going to be the baseline capacity is over 20% of its normal. We also have a temperature alert, which is something I really like about this system. It'll be particularly useful for trailer tires because one of the main reasons they fail is they get too hot for one reason or another. We're underinflated, they're overinflated, or we're overweighing the trailer. They can get too hot, and then that's what causes a blowout. So we're going to actually have a temperature reading in each of our sensors here that we can display on our monitor. And if that gets out of range, we don't actually have to set that. It's already going to be preset depending on what the PSI of the tire is. So if that's out of range, it's going to give us an alert letting us know we need to pull over or slow down. So something else that our system comes with here, now a lot of people don't like to mess with these because everything is pretty much easy for this installation, for the exception of that one part where we do have to attach 2 wires, and that's going to be for the signal booster. Now, we do get a lot of people who don't necessarily have a long setup, they just have a small trailer and tow vehicle, so they don't feel they need the signal booster, but you do need to install this no matter your application. If you have a motorhome and you're towing a vehicle, you even have maybe a Class A, where your setup is pretty long, it's definitely going to be beneficial for you here because we're going to be able to communicate with both the sensors on our motorhome as well as the towed vehicle, even if it's a little bit further back than normal. So that signal booster is really going to come in handy. It does a couple different things. It obviously boosts the signal, but it also increases the strength of the signal. Now, the reason this is important is because there's tons of wireless devices today on our vehicles and our RVs, so there could be a pretty great chance of interfering or 2 competing signals. The wireless booster, or repeater rather, it's going to help improve those chances that we don't have any interference issues. So another nice thing about this system here is that we can actually monitor in real time on the same screen up to 22 different tires. Therefore, no matter if you have a motorhome and a towed vehicle, you have a tow vehicle and a 5th wheel or a travel trailer, single, dual, or triple axle, you're going to be covered with this system here. Right now we actually have it set up for a motorhome and a towed vehicle. Our motorhome has a dually axle, so you can see we have our front 2 tires up here, we have the rear outside tires, and then we have the rear inside tires, and then we have the 4 tires on our towed vehicle. So no matter what your setup is, whether you have dually tires on the towed trailer, that's even a possibility as well. We have dually tires on the towing vehicle. We're really going to be covered. We're going to be able to set all these pressures and set them up in the right location so they're easy to read and we know which tires have what PSI. So a question we get about a lot of these TPMS systems is in regards to towing different trailers or removing a trailer from a vehicle, or in this case a motorhome that we have now. So say we're going to unhook our towed vehicle and we want to drive around in our motorhome, but we don't want any alerts or readouts from the towed vehicle, which we don't obviously have behind our motorhome here. We can actually disconnect these 4 bottom sensors here, or you can disconnect however many tires you have. We can actually go into a separate mode here, which is going to be the disconnect mode, and we can actually clear these 4 tires here that represent our vehicle towed behind our motorhome. We can clear those out of the system so we can just display the ones here for our motorhome tires when we're just in our motorhome. So another feature that this system has, it's a question we get quite often. So we're in our motorhome now and we have our towed vehicle hooked up behind us. We obviously have the pressure readings on the display here. So let's say we want to drive our motorhome without the towed vehicle attached, but we don't want to display the tire pressures for that towed vehicle. We can actually disconnect these from the system entirely, so we're just displaying the motorhome sensors. So far we've been using our little handheld monitor here, which is nice. It's durable, it's easy to read, has a color display. We have these buttons at the bottom here. However, if you don't want to use this, maybe you already have your phone set up in the dash here for one reason or another, whether that be for music or navigation, and you want to use your phone to display the PSI readouts as well as the alerts, you can actually do that by downloading the free TireMinder app. So the TireMinder isn't the only TPMS on the market. There's several. We actually carry a couple different brands, and I've worked a little bit with each of these. However, I have to say I really like this TireMinder system here. Not only is it compatible with this handheld device as well as Bluetooth, I would say the ease of use and installation, I'd definitely give the edge here to the TireMinder. It's one of my favorite systems I've set up so far. Everything is pretty seamless. It's pretty easy to understand and learn. You do want to go ahead and read over the instruction manual, but everything's pretty straightforward, nothing too complex. So in regards to mounting, in our kit here, we're going to have this nice little bracket here that comes with a sticky / suction cup mount. There's a little ball and socket joint on the back, and then a magnet that attaches to the back of the monitor. Now, granted, we don't necessarily need to be looking at this thing constantly. It does have an audible alert, so even if we just set it in the cup holder or something, we will still be able to hear it go off. But if you're one of those people where you do want to look at it all the time or have it in your field of view, you can easily mount it up on your dash somewhere. Chances are, if you have a motorhome, you probably won't be able to use the windshield mount portion of this, but if you have a truck, you could probably mount it there. But in our motorhome here, I just went ahead and cleaned off the dash surface and just mounted the sticky mount straight to that. So you can see here, we have a magnetic mount on the back of our monitor we can use to hold it. While it's not being used in our kit here, we're gonna get this nice little carrying case. This is also where we're gonna keep our extra batteries for our sensors here. Now you're gonna get a few extra that come with your kit here, but we do obviously sell some extras here through eTrailer as well. So there are a couple different versions of the A1AS. In order to choose the right one, you need to know how many tires you're going to be monitoring. So we've installed this particular one here. It's the 10 sensor version because we have a dual axle motorhome and a towed vehicle. It is, however, also available in a 4 sensor version as well as a 6 sensor version. And we can always add additional sensors. They're sold separately as well. So the first step of our installation here, we need to install our signal repeater. Now I'll go ahead and answer a question now that we get frequently. Yes, you do have to install this thing no matter how long or short your RV is. It is required for installation of the system and for proper functioning. However, to install it, it's pretty easy. We just need to find a constant 12-volt power source. And what I mean by this is the circuit needs to have power at all times, even without the keys in the ignition. So the first place I checked on our RV here is going to be the battery charge line circuit on the 7-way. We want the repeater to be installed as far rear to the RV as possible. So the 7-way trailer connector is obviously going to be at the very rear, and we do sometimes have constant power there. This particular one, that circuit was keyed, meaning it only gets power when the keys are in the ignition. Therefore, that's not going to work with us. We went ahead and checked all the rear cargo bay doors to see if there's any lights there. We could use that to splice into as well. This thing doesn't draw much power at all, so we really don't need a really heavy circuit. So the next step would be to find the house batteries. Now the house batteries, this is going to vary depending on your motorhome. They're really placed all over, usually under the cargo bay doors, under the rear there. Ours are actually going to be under the stairs here. So again, these next couple steps could vary depending on where your batteries are, but ours are just under this panel here. So now you can see we have our 3 house batteries here. We're going to simply use one of them. It doesn't matter which. Here's the positive side, here's the negative side. And we have 2 wires coming from our repeater here. We have a red for positive and black for negative. Now, if you want to make this real easy on yourself, you can actually just hook these up using the alligator clamps to the terminals on our battery. However, we're going to opt for a little bit more of a permanent installation. Therefore, we're actually going to cut off these alligator clamps, and we are going to be installing a ring terminal. Just a note for you guys, if you do want to use the permanent installation method, you'll have to pick up a couple of ring terminals. We do sell some here at eTrailer, or you can get them at the hardware store. Pretty common part, but they're not going to be included with our kit here. So just so we don't get confused, once we have the power wire one attached, I'll go ahead and attach it to one of our batteries. And now we'll just repeat that same process here for the black, which is going to be for the ground on the negative terminal. So once we have our power and ground wires connected, we should see the green light here on our signal repeater. So the next step is going to be to mount this. So again, we want this on the underside of the vehicle if possible, and we want it as far back as possible. So our house battery is a little bit further towards the front than I would have liked. So we're going to be using the entire length of this wire here. We're just going to run it far back as possible, and then we're going to again mount it to the underside of the RV here. Keep in mind this housing here is weatherproof, so we're not going to have any issues for it getting wet. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop this down in the frame now. Then we're going to run the sensor as far as it allows us to with the wire that we have, and we can mount it up. We'll show you that part next. So here you can see we have our signal repeater mounted. We just used a couple self-tapping screws here and secured it to one of these metal panels underneath our RV here. And then we just have the wiring secured to an existing wiring harness running down the frame there, and then the other end obviously attached to our house battery here. So we had it reach as far back as we can, and we just installed it right here. It is sort of a little bit far forward, more than I would have liked, but again, we didn't really have an option here with our RV because the house batteries were under the steps, but it's not too long of an RV, so it should be good. But again, just a reminder, make sure we get this thing as close to the rear as possible. So our next step is to begin installing our batteries into our transmitters here. Now, we're actually going to have some extra batteries in our kit, which is nice. We do obviously sell these separately as well in case yours run out or you just want to pick up a few extra. But it's super simple to install these batteries. Just take one of our transmitters out, unscrew the cap counterclockwise, take one of our batteries here. The smooth side is going to be facing up. There's a little slot in there. Just simply press that in like so. Then we'll re-screw on the cap here. Pretty simple, tighten it down, not too tight. And we'll just repeat the same process for our other transmitters, depending on how many we have. So now we're going to turn on our monitor here. We should see this screen that reads monitoring. What we want to do is we want to go ahead and take the top and bottom arrows here at the bottom. We're going to hold these both for 5 seconds. And now we're going to see the learn screen. So this is basically going to let us know which position we're going to be installing our transmitters in. So you can see here we have multiple different positions here, which are those 2 dashed lines. Right now it's going to be pre-selected for the front left. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take one of our transmitters here. We're going to go to the driver's side front tire on our RV here, and we're going to install it in that position. And once we screw in the transmitter, wait 5 seconds, we should hear a beep, and then it should give us the readout display of the PSI in that tire. Now we can actually rotate our tires here, or not rotate, rather choose a different tire setting by pressing the up and down arrow. You can see we're on the passenger front here. You can see it just going through these steps here. So we're going to go ahead and learn all of our transmitters now to each of the selected tires. So now we're going to come over here to the driver front tire as we said. We're going to remove the cap. We want to pay attention to the material construction of our valve stem. So in our kit here, it's going to come with our brass sensors, meaning the insert here that screws onto the valve stem is going to be a brass construction. Now this is going to work for the majority of valve stems out there. There is, however, one kind that this won't work with, and that's going to be if you have the aluminum valve stems. If you have aluminum valve stems, most RVs, you're not going to have to worry about this. There's actually only a couple select towed vehicles that would have the aluminum valve stems. TireMinder does offer a separate sensor here which you can exchange for the aluminum valve stem. We do sell this separately as well. So you want to make sure you don't have aluminum, and if you do, you'll have to purchase the aluminum sensors. But for the vast majority of applications, you don't have to worry about this. I just want to let you guys know ahead of time. In order to be sure that we don't have any issues with cross-threading, it might be a good idea just to go ahead and clean off the threaded part of the valve stem here. Also, not required, but if you have it, some dielectric grease here, it'd be a good idea to go ahead and put those on the threads as well. Just need a little bit. Now we can go ahead and screw on our sensor. So we should start to hear air escape, and then once we have it tight, it'll close. So you can see now we have our tire pressure readout for that front driver's side tire. We're going to cycle over to the passenger side front tire, and now we'll just repeat that same process. So now that we have our front 2 sensors installed, we'll go ahead and move on to the rear two. Now, there's going to be a couple different things that we need to make note of. This next couple steps may also vary a little bit depending on what motorhome you have. It's not going to be the same for everyone. But we got a dually here, so we have an outside tire and then an inside tire. We're going to be installing the sensor for the outside tire first. So depending on how hard yours is to get to, ours is sort of tucked back up under this little pocket in the wheel here. We're going to go ahead and remove this cover because it's going to make it a little bit easier to get to that valve stem. Now again, these next couple steps could vary, but most of the time to remove this cap here, you're going to have several of these little lug nut covers. There's only a couple of them that are actually threaded. If you just feel them, you should be able to feel a little indent there. That lets us know that there's a threaded one. Out of all these on here, there are only 2 that are threaded. So I'm going to be taking a 1 1/8" socket. We're going to go ahead and remove those threaded covers. We'll go ahead and remove one of those all the way so we can show you. There's that little divot that we were talking about. These other ones are actually smooth and they're actually not removable. So you can see now that we have a little bit more room, we should rather easily be able to go ahead and screw on our sensor. So we'll go ahead and verify the readout on our display. Then we'll hit the up arrow to move on to the one adjacent to that one, which is going to be for the inside tire. So this brings me to another thing I need to make note of. It's valve stem extenders. So the majority of the times you're not going to be able to reach the valve stem on the inside tire because it's tucked away there. So a lot of people have these valve stem extenders. Now there's a couple issues you can run into while using these with the tire pressure monitoring systems. Number one, they must be pressurized. So there's 2 different types of valve stem extenders. There's a non-pressurized type and there's a pressurized type. The pressurized type essentially means that the tube or the body of the valve stem extender is pressurized, meaning as soon as you screw it in, the air is going to come all the way up to our inflation valve here. So you need to make sure that you have the pressurized valve stem extenders. And number 2, ideally we would be using a hard valve stem extender, meaning it's a one-piece solid metal. Here we have the braided valve stem extenders, which can be used with this kit here. They're not the best ideally because sometimes they can just create issues. They wiggle around a lot and they can also create leaks. But it is still permissible to use these sensors with the braided valve stem extenders. But if you can, I would opt for the hard metal lines here. So just a note, sometimes this particular setup, you're really not going to be able to install a hard line because the valve stem is just tucked back too far there. So even with a pretty long extension, you probably wouldn't be able to fit. So in this case, the braided hose is our only option. So then again, we're just repeating the same process. For the towed vehicle, on the display, you will see a line that sort of separates the coach here from the trailer or the towed vehicle, depending on your setup here. So just make sure you're on that second section here for our towed vehicle. So most of our newer towed vehicles are actually going to have an integrated TPMS sensor. Whether they use a band clamp that wraps around the wheel or there's a device at the back of the valve stem, you don't have to worry about any interference between the 2 systems. So once we have all of our sensors paired, we're in the learn mode now. We need to go back to the monitoring mode. In order to do this, just simply hold these 2 buttons at the bottom of the screen, again for 5 seconds. So now that we're back in monitoring, let's go ahead and switch over to the final step here, which is to adjust the baseline readings. In order to do that, we're going to press and hold the center button for 5 seconds. So as you can see at the top, we're in our baseline mode here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to choose our unit of measurement, whether that be PSI or bar. We're obviously going to be using PSI. Press the center button again. We can cycle between Celsius and Fahrenheit. We're obviously going to be using Fahrenheit. And if we press that button again, we can go ahead and set our temperatures for each of our tires, or rather the PSI. So in order to do this, there's a couple different things we can do. We can check the tire loading information sticker on our RV or vehicle, or if you don't have one of those, you can actually read this directly from the tire. We'll show you that now. So we're going to come out here to one of our tires. We're going to be starting on the front driver's side because that's what the preset is going to be once we finish the temperature setting. That's the one that's going to be flashing that we're going to be adjusting first. So it's going to vary depending on your tire manufacturer, but usually when you see the tire size here, you'll see the load range. And if you read the smaller text, you should be able to see the cold PSI, which for this particular tire is going to be 110. So that's what we're going to enter as our baseline reading for our front driver's side tire. So now we'll go ahead and use our up and down arrows to adjust the PSI to the correct baseline reading of 110 PSI. Once we have that selected, go ahead and hit the center button. And now we're pretty much just going to be cycling through our tires like we did before. We'll show you guys next when we get to the towed vehicle. So most of your smaller vehicles are going to be 32 PSI, so that's what we'll go ahead and set these to. And this is probably going to be most helpful, or it's going to be most likely found on the inside of the driver door jamb. You should see the tire load sticker there that has this information. So now that we have all the baseline temperature set, we can go ahead and put it back into the monitoring mode by simply holding the center button here for 5 seconds. And that'll do it today for our look and installation of the TireMinder A1AS TPMS for RVs and trailers.